time for another episode of the Animated Critics. Coming to you live from the studio, it's your favorite movie mavericks, T and J.
Hi, I'm T.
And I'm Jay. Welcome to an all-new episode of This Week in Movies presented by the Animated Critics. Let's take a look at the weekend box office.
It looks like it was a focked up weekend at the box office. The Little Fockers came in at number one, with $26 million, for a total of $100 million now, $103 million. Doing well. I think it's all because of the holiday weekend, really. It has nothing to do with this movie being good, as critics have all said, unanimously pretty much, that it's crap. It is surprisingly getting good word of mouth, so what do they know?
I think this all plays off the goodwill that the first film built up years ago. Broad comedies seem to play well during the holiday season, so not surprising this topped the box office this weekend. Performing strongly in second place and proving that it wasn't true shit, True Grit did perform to $24.5 million, has now an estimated $86 million at the box office, and looks to be one of the highest grossing westerns on record, possibly going on to rival Unforgiven in adjusted dollars by the end of its run, and it could match that film and do better at the Oscar race as well, because people are talking possible nominations in all major categories.
My question now is, does Hollywood make more westerns, or do we continue on with the comic book movies, which are just doing less and less business?
We know Hollywood takes on anything that makes money and pounces on it. Like after Gladiator had all the Oscar reception, we had Troy and Alexander and everything in its wake of that. So I think we will see more westerns, especially because they've been putting their foot in the water over the last few years and kind of testing it out. We had 3:10 to Yuma, which did moderately well, and now we have this, which did even better. So I could see a large segment of the audience wanting this kind of throwback genre type film, and the Coen brothers, you got to give them credit for delivering a hit.
Absolutely. Well, there are plenty more westerns to be remade. They have a deep well to go back to.
Paramount owns the rights to a lot of those old westerns too, so there wouldn't be any sort of problems rebooting those franchises.
Warner Brothers now is just waiting for Clint Eastwood to die so they can start remaking all of his westerns.
Don't be foolish. Clint Eastwood's going to outlive us all.
And moving from one Jeff Bridges movie into the other, in at 3 was Tron, with $18.3 million for the weekend and a total of $130 million. And in my opinion, I don't think that this is earning enough money to get it into the black at any time soon. What do you think?
I think it's underperforming considering that Disney spent 10 weeks building up the audience awareness. It's kind of intriguing that this $130 million gross is about equal in adjusted dollars to what the 1982 film did, so it really didn't expand on the audience at all. With 25% of the gross coming from IMAX screens alone, you gotta say it's an underperformer. Landing in fourth place was the Justin Timberlake vehicle, Yogi Bear.
Yogi.
Hey, yo, boo-boo. With an estimated $13 million for the weekend, and pushing its total now to $66 million. Neither of us thought we'd even hit that level a couple weeks back when it premiered.
I'm really surprised that it was able to do this. I'd account this all to Justin Timberlake's amazing performance as Boo Boo. And let's move on.
As we close out the year, let's take a look at the market share percentages of each studio.
So Warner Brothers stayed on top again for the third year in a row. Since 2001, they've done over $1 billion. I think the only studio to have a streak like that. They released 24 movies in 2010, but there were about 9 movies that carried over from 2009, making a total of 33 movies that really made up the Warner Brothers canon for this year, which really proves that Warner Brothers is making movies that have staying power.
I think the most surprising thing to me, looking down this list, is that Fox, after taking the beating it did all year, still managed to wind up in third place. They released 17 films this year. 20 films go towards this total. You have to imagine a large chunk of that was Avatar's gross from January 1st of 2010 on. It made a significant amount of its $700 million. And that goes towards this, but I mean, they had a slate that underperformed all year, but still managed $1.5 billion in market share.
It's equally as amazing that Sony being at only number 5 with seemingly to have hits this year over and over again, weekend after weekend, especially in summer. But even as we talked about last episode, they have had dogs, and they definitely rounded out this year with a couple of them.
And in 6, you have Universal, which was the lowest of all the major studios. Like I said earlier in the show, it had a woeful 2010, under $1 billion, 842 estimated at this point. They released second fewest films of anybody, and they had just no return on their investments. So like I said, Despicable Me and Little Fockers were the only thing to cross that 100 million mark, and next year's lineup doesn't look much better. An absolutely ridiculous placing was the last, with CBS Films had under $100 million for its total year, representing 0.7% of the overall pie, and It's just unbelievable how bad they did this year. CBS stands for crap and bullshit films.
To be fair, they did only release 3 movies, but I mean, when you only made, what, $72 million of 3 movies, that's pretty bad.
And behind us, you see the list of the top 5 grossing films for 2010. Toy Story 3 obviously led the way with a significant margin. Disney also had 2 films this year that broke $1 billion at the worldwide box office. I believe that's the first time any studio has ever managed that feat. So kudos to Disney for having a product that was seen worldwide on those levels. But how did the box office fare overall compared to other years?
It's being reported right now that 2010's overall domestic box office is about $10.5 billion, and it's down just 0.3% from 2009's record-breaking $10.58 billion. The real kicker here is attendance, which was down over 5%. For the releases of 2010, this is a pretty good year.
It's also interesting to note that the average ticket price inflated by 45 cents from 2009 to 2010, from $7.50 in 2009 to $7.95 in 2010, and that obviously can be attributed to the glut of 3D films that were released this year. This seemed to be the year that movie studios thought they would get people back to the theater by offering them 3D product, and I think it's actually had the transverse effect, where people are almost burnt out by 3D now.
Especially considering that since '95, ticket sales have averaged about 1.3 to 1.5 billion. It fluctuates, it's a market that is driven by good movies. If you put out good movies people want to see, you're going to do a little bit better. If you put out a slew of, MacGruber and A-teams, you're going to get screwed.
Since we're taking a look back at the year that just passed, we're going to go ahead and give you our best and worst films of 2010. In the 5th position for me, my 5th favorite film of 2010 was Wall Street 2, the Michael Douglas Shia LaBeouf film, and I thought it was great. I loved the score, the acting, and I hope it gets some notice when the Academy Awards comes around.
My number 5 has to be Harry Potter, and I was really impressed with this movie, just in general, as far as a Harry Potter movie goes. It's incredible to me that the most enjoyable scene of this film was written just for the movie and wasn't in the book, and that to me really shows that movies are a different medium, and you can't just take a book and turn it into a movie. My number 4 was Book of Eli, and I really enjoyed the twist ending on this. Especially if you go back and watch it a second time, you can see a lot of the setups for that. Him, as he is in his environment, dealing with his sensory deprivation, if you will. I'm trying not to give away the end here. No spoilers.
My 4th favorite film of the year was Edge of Darkness, a film that was released last January, Mel Gibson's touted comeback film, and I was kind of blown away by this, wasn't expecting much, and left the theater very impressed by it. My 3rd favorite film of the year was The Fighter, the recently released true story about Irish Mickey Ward and his struggle in the ring and outside the ring with his drug-addicted brother. Great movie, great acting. I was a little disappointed in it because I know the story of Mickey Ward and they kind of glossed over some things, but overall, one of the best movies I saw this year.
My number 3 is Greenberg, and I really enjoyed the writing in this film, but more so, I really enjoyed Ben Stiller. I really think that he really embodied the role and just really fit it to a T. My number 2 is Social Network, again carrying over with great writing, great dialogue, and an absolutely amazing score by Trent Reznor. This is definitely a movie that I think we're going to see on a lot of people's top 5s.
In my number 2 spot, I have The Town, Ben Affleck's second film that he directed, and I think this is an outstanding achievement for somebody who was written off years ago. Not only did he direct it, he stars in it, his performance is good enough to be Oscar-worthy itself, the direction is Oscar-worthy, and The Town should be up for Best Picture. If it doesn't get recognized, I'll be very upset. And my favorite film of 2010 was The Social Network. Excellent score, as you had stated, top-notch writing, excellent acting from all around, including a surprise performance by Justin Timberlake. I think this film is mesmerizing. I've seen it twice. It doesn't lose its effect, and I look for big things from this come Oscar night.
My number 1 is Tron Legacy. And I know a lot of people are going to give me crap about this, but it's a great popcorn flick that has a lot more going on in it than you would expect. And, that Daft Punk score rocking on that 12,000 watt IMAX surround sound just wins me over every time.
And just missing out on our top 5, but worthy of honorable mentions, for me was Night and Day, the Tom Cruise Cameron Diaz film that played this summer. It had a lot of negative buzz going into it, but I found it nothing but enjoyable. I liked it a lot, did well overseas, and turned into a kind of a hit for Fox. And the second mention I have this year is for Takers, another film that kind of flew under the radar, and I had no expectations going into it. It was a totally enjoyable heist film, a very low-key town, if you will, and I think it deserved to be seen as widely as it was.
My two runners-up to my top 5 list, definitely grown-ups. I was very surprised with this Adam Sandler movie, and I'm glad that he's going in more of a direction, films such as Click, and more of his family-oriented stuff. He does really good when he's not playing a character like a little Nicky. After that, I'd have to say From Paris with Love. I really, really enjoyed John Travolta in this role. It was a role that just seemed to be meant for him to play.
All right, and that leads to top 5 worst films of 2010. For me, in the 5th position was the snore Prince of Persia, an absolutely dreadful Jerry Bruckheimer production that was bloated, overlong, uninvolving, and just not very fun to look at.
Well, I'll one-up yours with Repo Man. A great movie until you get to the end, in which the entire thing unravels and you just want to stab your eyes out. And at number 4, I'm going to pick Furry Vengeance. I really like Brendan Fraser, but he does make some real duds sometimes, and this is one of those just horrible family adventure type movies that just does not cut it at all.
For me, the 4th worst film of the year was Going the Distance. It was sold as a comedy. I didn't find a laugh in it. Couldn't stand this film. It felt like 2.5 hours, and I guess it was under 90 minutes, but the writing was subpar, the acting was minimalistic, and just an absolutely dreadful experience. The 3rd worst film for me this year was Jonah Hex. Rightly bombed at the box office, one of the year's biggest failures from production budget to box office gross, and deservedly so. This was a misguided film, nothing redeeming about it, and it was worse than I ever could have imagined.
My number 3 is The Backup Plan. Jennifer Lopez trying to recreate some magic from her films from the early 2000s. It felt like a 90s movie, and I just don't want to go back and watch anything from that era unless it's actually from the 90s. My number 2 is Bounty Hunter. Speaking of the 90s, here we have Jennifer Aniston trying to make movies still, and just another film that feels dated, just extremely dated.
The 2nd worst film I saw this year was The Wolf Man, Benicio del Toro's terrible film released by Universal earlier in the year, one in a long line of bombs that they would have in 2010, and this unwatchable piece of trash was released Valentine's Day weekend, thinking that they would get some sort of crossover audience. It had one decent weekend and fell off the map, deservedly so. And the worst film I saw in 2010 was the piece of shit Last Airbender. I couldn't stand this movie. I was lost in the first 3 minutes, could never pick it up after that, and was uninvolved for the following 127 minutes that followed. A bloated piece of work that shouldn't be seen by anybody.
My number 1 is surprisingly your number 3, Jonah Hex, and I don't know how this is number 3 on your list. This is just the worst movie of the year in my opinion. They had no idea what they were doing. It looks like they shot some amazing action sequences, especially that opening sequence that looks like it could have rivaled Gladiator's opening just in the Civil War era thing. It looked fantastic. And instead they chopped it all to hell. Looks like they got some explosions, set them off, and then that was it. It was just a horrible movie. Everyone in it should retire except for Josh Brolin, and even he was crap in it, but he can go on. Megan Fox needs to stop making movies because she's horrible. Be sure and check MovieMavericks.com for reviews of Gulliver's Travels, True Grit, and Little Fockers, and an early review of Season of the Witch.
That does it for our show this week. Thank you for joining us for a look back at 2010, and be sure to check with us next weekend for an all-new episode.